everybody, welcome back to Art by Galen. I'm Galen Eilenfeld, and today we're going to be taking an in-depth look at one-point perspective. First off, this is going to be a very in-depth tutorial. Perspective is a basic and fundamental skill, but it does take some time to learn and put into practice. But I'm going to show you an easy way to do that. So if you come over here with me, we'll get started. Okay, I'd like to start off by saying, perspective is an artistic skill, but it's also highly technical. It's got a specific set of rules that must be followed, and if you don't follow those, it can very easily break the piece that you're working on. Perspective is one of those very unforgiving aspects of art to where, no amount of polish or rendering or lighting or any other fancy tricks will fix it. It's like you can use all of those other tricks that you want, broken perspective will still destroy the entire piece. So I'm going to show you how to get started at the most basic level, and then we'll go from there. Okay? So two main things you want to remember when you're doing perspective are your horizon lines and your vanishing points. Okay? Horizon line is just a horizontal line that goes across the canvas. Actually, let me do that on a new layer. Your vanishing point is a point on that line where all parallel lines will converge. So for instance, if you are looking down a street, the sides of the road will be wide where you're standing, but if you're looking out towards the horizon, they will converge onto that point, as will the edges of buildings and pretty much anything that runs parallel with those lines. I'll give you a quick little demonstration of that in a real world scenario. Here's a photo that I found on Google. It's I don't own this, I'm just using it for educational purposes here, but I've got a white layer on top of it so we can see my lines a little bit more clearly. But if we take and draw straight lines along straight edges, like for instance the top of this building here, and then we'll use the top of this edge right here, and we'll run it down into the center. That where they intersect actually gives us our horizon line, so we can from there get our horizontal, and then you can use that point to create all of the other lines, like the bottom of the buildings. I think even the sidewalk lines up with it. Sorry. Yeah, even the lines of the sidewalk line up with that. They all converge on that same point, and that's all I'm trying to illustrate here. So we will delete that. Back to our white layer and make a new layer. And so I'm going to start off very easily and show you how to do some basic shapes in one-point perspective. Start off with a square, or roughly a square. It may not be perfect. But the principles for this are the same for a square as they are for a rectangle, so you can use this for both. So we'll say we have a vanishing point right here. And I'm going to switch over to red so you can see these lines. And we will draw a line from the vanishing point to the edges of our square. And what we're doing is we're creating the top plane and the side planes of that shape. Sorry. You can also go to the back corner, but if it's a solid object, if it's not translucent or somewhat transparent, you wouldn't see that edge. And then you choose how far back it is, how far back does it go, and then from there do a perfectly horizontal line and a vertical line, and there you've got your cube instead of a square. Another thing that you can do, and we'll continue working in red, is drawing circles but in perspective. Like if it were laying flat on a ground, like if you're drawing a street and you want to make a manhole cover, but you want to make sure that the circle is accurate. The way you would do that is first off draw, believe it or not, a square, but in perspective. So we'll give ourselves a horizontal line and connect the edges to our vanishing point. And I'm using a new vanishing point over here, so right here this time. And then we will give ourselves another horizontal line, roughly about like so. Now, how do we turn this into a circle? First we have to divide it a few times. If we connect the opposite corners, we can find our center point in that square. So we know that right here is the center. And then if we run a line from the horizontal or from the vanishing point through that center point, we find our halfway mark. So we know from there, if we draw a horizontal line, that is our halfway mark going back. And then if we do that one more time for all of these little sections, so dividing all 4 of these sections into, finding their center points, from there you can find, or you can better draw in your circles, because the way that it works is your circle will always touch these edges. Let me zoom in a little bit here. Your circle will always come out to these edges, so you know for sure that it's going to come here and here all the way around. Now the reason we'd made this grid on these 4 sections is halfway between these outer corners, like from the center point to the outer corner, halfway between those on all of these, the circle will intersect. And you can further divide this if you want to find the exact point, but I'm just kind of estimating it here for demonstration's sake. And what you do is you just take a curve and connect those lines. And you can spend a little bit of time and smooth it out as much as you like. In perspective, it's easy to be tempted to just draw an oval when you're doing circles in perspective. But it's not entirely accurate because they're thinner on the back side than they are on the front side. They're more narrow. Okay. Alright, so we've got our circle. And from here, like say you wanted to make a cylinder, you could take and just do vertical lines from the edges, come up, and do the same thing with our square. Bring vertical lines up. And then we'll say, okay, we want the top of it to be here. And then so we would connect vanishing point to that corner, vanishing point to that corner, and where it intersects here, draw a line across. And then we would just, I went to the wrong corner, I see. Vanishing point to this corner, sorry, and this corner, and then this would come up a little farther, then we draw a horizontal line across. And so now we know the cube that cylinder would reside in, and we can do the same method to make the circle for the top. And then these lines here that I'm coloring over in green would be the actual sides, because that is the edge of the circle, and not the square that's guiding us to create it. So if we take a few steps back, from here we can also create a cone. If you go from the very center, give yourself a vertical line for whatever height of the cone you want it to be, and then connect the vertical tip to the sides. You can create a cone in perspective. You can do the same thing with a pyramid if you were to use the square. So you give yourself a vertical line and then connect the tip to all of your 4 corners. Now, depending on your angles, some of them may or may not show. Like for this one, that back corner wouldn't be shown if you were to render it out. But this is the basics of how to create all of those different shapes in one-point perspective. Another application is to create a scene using one-point perspective, like you're looking down a city street, similar to the image that we looked at when we first started. And here, it's the same thing. You would excuse me, take your vanishing point and create your grid, and find your horizon, and then from there you could build using vertical lines where are your buildings, and then if you want to find the tops of your buildings, you use your perspective. And then for your sides, you just do more vertical lines. And for the edge, like if you had a building where this, let me use another lighter layer here. Go back to red. So let's say you wanted to show, like pretend this building wasn't here, and you wanted to show this building on the side. Using 1-point perspective, it's very simple. All you would do is use just a horizontal line from the edge. It would go straight off like so, and then this would come down to the ground and it would go straight over. And then wherever it stopped, it would be another vertical line. And so that would be like the side of that building. Another trick that we can use is using the method that we used to create the center point in our square earlier. Let me zoom out. We can create repeating patterns that go back in perspective, but they reduce at an accurate size. Like for instance, if we were to do a chessboard, and that's what I'm going to do for this demonstration. So let me turn on my rulers. I'm going to scroll this up. I know that a chessboard has 8 sections, so if I give myself 9 marks, we can create a chessboard. And I'm just going to make a mark every inch, so I know that I have evenly spaced sections. So that's 9, or is that, no, that's 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, yeah, that's 9. So we will take a horizontal line tool and go straight across all of those points, and then we will make a vanishing point here. Now if we take our line tool and make vanishing points, I can English, make lines connecting from the vanishing point to these spaces that we've divided out to each of these points. That will give us the rows on the chessboard. Okay, so now we've got all of the lengthways rows divided, and this is how we're going to show the horizontal rows, and this is how to properly divide them. Firstly, you will take your line tool. You need to decide how far back is that first section. You want to make it relatively square looking, so you just kind of make it like so. You don't want it to be like this, because that's obviously not a square, and same thing if you got too close. So we'll put it about here, and then we can pick any one of these to work with, and all we want to do is find the center point, and then we've got that. And then from our vanishing point, let me do this in a different color. We will draw a line through the vanishing point, from the vanishing point through the center line, and then from the bottom right corner, we will draw a line from there through where it intersects at the top. So I'm going to mark them as A and B. And that's the bottom right corner of a square. So if you were doing this square, it would be here, and you would have your lines, and then this line would come down and intersect. So you would go from here to here. Same thing. So now we will go back to our red color. From here, where this point hits the side, you draw another horizontal line, and that gives us our second square in that row. And if we go back to our green color, do the same thing. Go from bottom right corner of that square now, through where it intersects and off to the side. Go back to our red, and horizontal line. And that is our third square. So we're going to keep going. I'm going to do this so I can just switch between these colors fairly easily. If we do, we're going to keep going until we have 8 rows. So that's 1. And that makes 4. From bottom right corner through the intersecting line. And that makes 5. Bottom right corner through the intersecting line. And I know this is a little tedious, but this is the way to do it. You can do this to create repeating patterns of Like if you had poles coming up out of the ground, you could evenly space them. If you had windows that were spaced on on the side of a building, you can use this to measure the distance between them, and to measure the size of the actual windows. It's got a lot of really practical uses, and it's not that hard to do. Okay, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 we've got. 7. And 8. Okay, so now we've got the 8 rows, and if we draw a horizontal line from through each of these all the way across our board, that will evenly and accurately have them reduce in size as they go back in perspective. You could use this to make a tiled floor. You could use this to make a chessboard or a checkerboard like I'm doing. It's got lots and lots of great uses. And so here, we've got our chessboard, and like if I were to go through and select out all of the squares that are going to be filled in, like you've got a white and black board. Let's hope I'm doing this accurately. Okay, and now if we fill all of those, that should give us our board. You see? Very simple. It takes a little bit of time, but it is very, very worth it. I will do another video on doing people in perspective, because that kind of, it's a lot to cover, and I don't want to throw too much into one video. But one point perspective, as simple as it is, it has a lot of really practical uses. For some of the stuff that we've demonstrated here, you can also use it to do a top-down view on something. Like for instance, if you let's say you've got a vanishing point right in the center, and then let's say you're drawing a room from, like if you were up on the ceiling or above the ceiling looking down on it. So you've got a kind of a rectangular shape here, right? Now let's say we've got a bed sitting, well, first of all we need to decide the walls. Like, okay, so we if we go from our vanishing point outward and cross those corner points where the sides come together, that can accurately give us like our walls. So we draw one wall that determines the height, and then where that intersects with that line that comes through, that creates our walls. So we know that this X that goes through wouldn't actually be there, because that is the floor of the room. So we can actually erase a lot of that out. But let's say, okay, we've got our room, and we want to do a bed up against the wall right here. So we'll draw like an outline of a bed, like so, and from our vanishing point to the corners, and maybe a little bit higher because it's not going to be sunken into the ground. So we'll go through all of the corners a little bit, probably a little bit farther on that one, and like so. And then if we give ourselves a height, like pick that, and that's how high it's going to be, where that crosses with these points, that gives us the the bed, but in perspective. You can use that same method to create various dressers or other pieces of furniture around the room. You can use it to build your scene however you want, using these really simple rules. I do appreciate you hanging out. I hope it's been informative. I hope it helps in at least some way. I'm going to do probably at least 5 or 6 of these videos. We're going to cover, in the next one, we're going to cover 2-point perspective and then 3-point perspective. We're going to cover doing 2-point perspective, but with multiple sets of vanishing points. That way objects can rotate in 3D space but still fit within the scene. We're going to do multi-plane perspective. We're going to do fisheye perspective, like if you're looking through a fisheye lens. And we're going to use something really awesome called curvilinear perspective, which is something that sometimes animators use. I appreciate you hanging out and watching this video. If you liked it, be sure to hit that like button. If you want to see more and you haven't already done it, be sure to hit that subscribe button. And until next week, take care, and I'll see you then. Bye-bye.